Oh my God, that was a little scary. Good grief. Straight into the crazy images. Not my topic, though. I got a special guest. Not a special guest. A comeback guest. Anyway, welcome back to the show, CJTV. It is May 8th. May 8th. Topic for tonight. You know, we had a past show on the hidden profile of a female serial killer. There was a lot of research, multiple researchers on this show, but we had a cool topic come in. The psychopathy of the serial killer, regardless of whether it be male or female. Not the intricate details that separate them, but that's what tonight's episode is going to be about. With our guest researcher, author, yes, author, published author, and co-host. As of today, 1,681 downloads, 139 days, 32 plus thousand views. It's not bad for an academic show. Not bad, not bad. We're doing pretty good. Pretty good, pretty good. All right. Hensley B. Williams is back with us again. Hensley B. Williams was with us last week for an episode. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out on YouTube. Dr. Mike Gurley, CJTV, Criminal Justice TV. It's got all the episodes for all the researchers, all of our publication information, where to find it. All of our publication information downloadable through MediaFire or our Facebook, Dr. Mike Gurley, CJTV. No, it's not my personal. I got an email the other day. Is that your personal account? No. Seriously? No. Why would I do this and put that on there? No. And Indeed. Yep. Excuse me, not Indeed. LinkedIn. I said Indeed like I'm looking for a job. What do you think about that, Hensley? People think I'm looking for a job. Now that I screwed that up. Let's get on with it. Let's get rid of this so I can stop inserting insanity into my throat. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest researcher, and I'm going to pull our guest researcher right up into this camera, and wham! Welcome back. The psychopathy of a monster. Why the psychopathy? Why the serious concern in society? I wouldn't say concern. I would go as far as to say sociological morbid curiosity. Why is that curiosity? I mean, your perspective from the sociological side, because that's your background, that's your discipline, that's your hammer, within the symbiotic circle of psychology and CJ. Why are serial killers so fascinating to society? Why?
It has most to do with a lot of individuals would never even think to commit these acts or want to commit these acts, and they're interested in why and what happened to that individual to want to do these acts, like serial homicide, sexual sadism. They want to know why, because they could have grown up with a lot of the same factors that serial killers did, with childhood abuse and neglect, and they didn't turn out that way, and they want to know why the other individual did.
Well, most typically, some people within the psychopathy of trait development, grow up with, communal mother, father, the first thing they see would, hopefully be the, the non-psychopathic doctor, not a Dr. Kevorkian, so to say. But even within the households, when we go into psychopathy and serial killer homicide, this comes from me, from a CJ and from a psychological background. Psychopathy, it's a pattern behavior. It's developmental. It's that personality trait development, as you said, trauma, episodic memory recall, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the drawers are opening, and we all tend to, get swallowed into the shallow, minute emotion of Hollywood, the manipulation of Hollywood, even though the psychopathy side of it has, as you talked about our last show, the lack of empathy, the one being portrayed to themselves as the number one concern, the victims are less than human, they're number one. The violence of the person in the psychopath, well, psychopathy, that would create the psychopath. Your opinion, how does it differ from those that suffered injustice in developmental moments in childhood, teenage years? I mean, everybody has that, traumatic incident. Everybody has, but what makes it different that CJ must recognize and correctional institution must recognize? What really is the key, subtopic wise? What are we looking at here?
I think it has to do with no interventions done in early childhood. Um, Children who are isolated or isolate themselves through they may be bullied, or their childhood was not like dysfunctional families and abuse in childhood. They may have isolating factors in their lives. This can cause dehumanization towards other individuals like themselves, and can be easier to harm them and kill them. They don't have that emotional mental capacity to have remorse for victims because they've desensitized them so long.
So that life in that episode, so to say, the trauma in the episode of life, something that was lacking the remorse given to them, lacking the emotion given to them. I kind of, like I said last time, kind of like try to compare it to the Whitechapel side, the Whitechapel murders, Jack the Ripper. It's that trait development. It's that, if the dog bites his tail, everybody's seen the dog play with their tail and bite their tail. Well, all dogs should play with their tails and bite their tails. I know it's an odd cliche, but it's kind of, monkey see, monkey do, follow the leader, do unto others as they have done to you, but within the cluster traits of development. So kind of, I think society would, be able to comprehend that as far as, the lack of remorse or empathy. Your opinion, the serial murderer, okay, all homicide is death, but the serial homicide, you talked about it, last time, as far as inflicting harm. You talked about, the pauses within, the episode and the time, but why the pause in murder, homicide, and what is the trigger? What is the desired means? Like Michael Myers, only going to do this crazy stuff and kill multiple people on Halloween, but the objective was his sister. That's Hollywood, right? So the coldness, the planning, why the separation in time? Just kind of break that down for, the viewers to comprehend at a sociological level. Because me personally, psychological is it, but there's a bigger trigger sociological to serial killers. That's just my opinion, just through life experience as an investigator. So sociological side, why the big pausation? Why the, oh my God, it's time, murder button has been pushed? Why?
It usually has to do with the manifestation of a fantasy or a very dark fantasy that they have. Typically, they'll, once it gets to a point where they have to act on it, they will. And a lot of the cooling off periods can do with environmental factors. So maybe not being close to easy victims who are like either homeless or individuals that won't be, they're not going to be missed. Like they're not, and they're not a family, they're not a child, they're not a mother, they're just there. It can also be the fact that the police are around, so they have to stop what they're doing so they don't get caught. That's typically a cooling off period. But the cause of the actual intent to kill is the manifestation of a violent fantasy that they have.
So it's kind of like I wouldn't say crime of opportunity, because it's, you're looking at, serial homicide. But the serial killer, the murderer, the MO, the extended circumstance, the mens rea, obviously psychologically induced, sociologically, but the actus rea, the act, there has to be a signature. So even within that pause, I can see how there would be a signature in the pause and when one is going to stop. I mean, you kind of broke it down. And I know what you mean by, just a person, a standard person. Not everybody in society, and I agree with what you said, has that collective measure, sociological, family, community. There are those loners out there, those hermits, those ones that are just introverts that do not practice anything sociologically that would be extrovert, have a family, a mother, children, the soccer kids, the soccer parties. It's, from my CJ experience, multiple years, it's harder to target that one that is extrovert than it is that introvert. And you're right. Nobody's going to miss that mental health dilapidative person that nobody wants to interact with, the homeless person, the person that's, introverted, not extroverted. Thanks for that. I kind of tied a few things in sociologically. And ladies and gents watching the show, kind of keep this in mind. Psychology, sociology, and CJ, they're a symbiotic circle. You can't have one without the other. Thus, the research, they all tie in together. So, on all of our episodes, when you're watching, try to keep up with that cycle of three, kind of like Simba and Hakuna Matata and Disney, the circle of serial killers. Look at that. I just made something up. So you can cite me and quote me on that there, Hensley. Hakuna serial killer. All right. Serial killers, psychopath, the offender themselves, how often sociologically is a serial killer going to appear in society but be controlled? One would think that, a serial killer, and let's just use, Michael Myers. He's my favorite, besides it, besides the clown. Michael Myers is my favorite fantasy monster, so to say. He's a serial killer, but he kills indiscriminately, right? Kind of like the, equal opportunity, equal employment opportunity, federal law. He kills everybody, no discrimination. But everyone would think that when that serial killer shows up, there's that open anger, that chaos. Sociologically, can that be hidden based on what you said? There has to be an element for a trigger. Can it be hidden so well that everybody would miss it, like suicide? Nobody sees it. Can it be hidden that well?
Yes, it can. A lot of triggers you would think of is like a death of a family member, or just something very traumatic that happened in their life, but it can be just a gradual sense of events or manifestation, like being isolated for so long or being bullied for so long. That can gradually become more and more to someone's breaking point, and it becomes like a off switch. Well, they'll just turn it off, their humanity off, and they'll just act on their fantasies.
And it's kind of like a vampire. Anybody here watching a show ever watch the Vampire Diaries or, all those vampire movies? Turn your humanity switch off, click, and just killing spree. Blood everywhere. Victims, throats ripped out. Yep. So it's not everybody's going to be able to pick up on that manipulation or that anger or that chaos. There has to be that mitigating circumstance, that episode that turns the switch back on. Let me see here. We got a lot of interesting stuff here. The criminal justice system. Police, prosecutors, and correctional workers study psychopathy because it can help with the assessment of the danger. That's not really labeled for everyone in the CJ system or psychology system or sociology side. Uh, your opinion, I don't want to label everyone in all three aspects, psychology, CJ, or, sociology. And when I say these three, there are hundreds of jobs throughout all three. All right. How do you, in sociology, identify high risk factors for these offenders? Obviously, they're a high risk offender. What are you looking for in the world of sociology? Not CJ or psychology, but out there in the world, sociology, the environment. What are you looking for as a practitioner?
I would look mostly in their childhood. What are their adverse experiences in their childhood, whether that be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and just neglect as a whole. What was their upbringing like as in school, or how dysfunctional their family was? Mostly just looking at what events that could potentially be a cause for their behavior.
Now you're getting into the reasons for narcissism, sadomasochism, sadism, right? So even those, victimization. Within society, there's always that development, psychologically, and that question of what really happened to understand the psychopathy. All right, the level of cruelty that one was subject to. In the CJ system, pretty sure you're familiar with it. We have, two methodologies. One would be victimology, the study of the victim, before, exigent, during, and after the incident. And we have penology, the same thing, but would apply itself more toward assessment within the Department of Corrections, correctional rehabilitation, after sentencing. But it's the same as, it's the same as victimology, but it's, penal system, penology, same thing. So breaking this down, people need to understand, you hit on it a little bit, we hit each topic, within the show last time, but let's break a few things down, because not everybody understands what sadism means. People hear the word sadism and they think, the devil, horns, Mephistopheles, Beelzebub, Lucifer, they're thinking evil incarnate, Satan worship, the Church of Satan. They really do not understand what sadism is. So if you don't mind, sociologically, kind of break that down. And you also mentioned the sexual abuse in the CJ system. Mm-hmm. From, a lot of the cases that I worked with other investigators that did special victims, child sex crimes, there was a lot of sadism in the sexual assault against the child, more so than the adult, but the adult could quite possibly defend themselves. So break down the sadism and the tie for the sexual assault and the cruelty level in, sociological aspects for what you do.
Sadism is the act of taking pleasure from another person's pain, fear, or humiliation. When that excitement becomes sexual, it's called sexual sadism, which means cruelty and sexual arousal are linked together. This topic is important because it helps explain the distribution thoughts or fantasies can develop into harmful behavior over time. So sadism is just the act of getting pleasure from causing someone pain, and then when sexual arousal comes into play, it becomes sexual sadism, which is often it's often linked with psychopathy and serial killers. The sexual sadism part is usually manifested over time with their fantasies that they have, and that could just be domination, control, wanting to humiliate their victims, and this can be caused from childhood abuse over time, like with their mothers. They may hate women and want to cause a dominating role over them.
Okay, so again, Jack the Ripper. Mother was a prostitute. Love is violent. Watch this mother get killed. Disemboweled. That's just one of those, theories in it. But yeah, I'm tracking here. So, but within the sadism and the sexual arousal, we're talking about serial killers, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about love or intimacy here. So the separation of it, even with love and intimacy, everybody would confuse too BDSM, binding, bondage, sexual sadism, but it's not to the point to where you're truly causing physical pain, detrimental, which could possibly result in physical long-term harm, if not death. There are two different entities here, at a CJ side. So thanks for breaking that kind of down. It's kind of hard, for, I think, society to understand that it's just not being mean. It's really enjoying watching others hurt, suffer, bleed out, realize they're going to die. It kind of reminds me of someone gets kidnapped. They know they're going to die, and the offender says, "Would you like some water?" And they take the water and they say, "Thank you." Even though they're trying to be polite, even though they know they're going to die anyway, they're still going to try to be polite. The one that is the offender is still going to make them suffer the sadistic pain. So we get it. But how does that, sociologically, I know there are different aspects of society, how does it turn into 100% bona fide? And we're not talking about the 4 types of rapists as it applies to CJ for, prosecution, mens rea, actus rea. Sociologically, society hurts. Everybody would think society, there's a moral ought to, moral ought not. Most people in society are good. How does it turn from sadists wanting to see somebody hurt to sexual arousal? And just to help all the viewers, sexual arousal doesn't mean I got excited, I got an erection, I got, in layman terms, horny. That's not what it means in the aspect of CJ, nor in violent crime or inflicting pain. So twist it for the listeners here at a social level, social side. How does it turn into sexual gratitude, sex gratification, excitement? How was someone getting their own gratification here?
Sexual sadism is directly linked to sexual violent behavior. So this is rape and lust murders. They want to do anything they can to dominate their victim, and that is usually rape.
Rape. So, but the definition of rape, you're looking at it, within the breakdown of the legislative law, penis to vaginal canal, sexual battery. So even in the CJ side, that that's subject to the word of law too. So society, I can see how society would see the confused factor, because unless the word of legislative law describes rape as penis to vaginal canal or forced entry for sexual battery, object, finger, whatever it would be, it's still that sadism. It's still that sexual arousal through humiliation, conquering the power. Kind of like the power assertive. Definitely not the category 4 of the gentleman rapist, the apologetic one. All right, sadism. It's not just being mean, it's getting gratification. Lust can be sexual too, self-lust. Would you say that would be like the original sin of self-love, your own gratification, knowing you're the power, you're the alpha, the sigma of the whole painful ordeal, you're the one delivering it?
Mm-hmm.
It
could be, yes.
Yeah. Somebody's delivering the pain and there's nothing the victim can do about it. Not just the alpha, but the sigma. All right. Researchers suggest sadistic behavior may start as a fantasy. And we're not talking about Mickey Mouse, right? We're not talking about Disney. Sociologically, now there's a lot of dark stuff in society. Obviously, there's the dark intro web, right? That dark web, right? Dark, just kind of a joke for everybody. But what would be, from your experience, your research, your development as a scholar, what are some of the triggers to dark fantasies and ties to mental illness, sociologically?
a lot of serial killers state that they saw pornography at a very young age, and it's like BDSM or CNC, very harsh pornography, I would say. That can manifest over time, and I see that as a child, they may view that as normal. So when they get into teenage years and understand that not a lot of women want that, that can cause them to not really know how to behave and want to fulfill those acts, whether or not they consent to it or not.
Yeah, so they're having to rethink that developmental trait. They're having to rethink that thing. Yeah, I could see it. So the basic tactic, so to say, of the, I want to say cluster traits, but it's, it's trait development, but that, I would assume that would be a specific cluster in, developmental. Yeah, specific cluster. What? And you said something interesting. Not all females or women want that as a male serial killer. That's true too. I mean, think about the actual, I know I've read a lot of them. I've worked one case to where a young lad, we'll just say it there, shot and killed his father. It was a murder case, but he shot and killed his father because his father chastised him for approaching females, and he got kicked out of a university, not one, but two, masturbation in the university, got caught. But the young male, the son, had a mental illness, a dilapidation, but was still able to, in descriptors, fantasize, as you said. And the females at the university did not like that. It wasn't one university, it was two universities. And he actually fantasized about going and getting that Glock 22 and building a special edition and killing his father. He did that. So, yeah, what you're saying kind of, and for those of you that really want to do the research, Hernando, Mississippi, Kyle Road. Yeah, look that up. That was a real case. Shot and killed his father. Mental dilapidation. Tying it all together. Look at you. Tying your knowledge to my past investigations and making me say, that's what that was. All right. Early signs. Now, we've covered sadism. We've covered social, and ladies and gents, we try to keep this quick. We try to keep it, fast and furious. This is no substitution for a classroom by any means. If you want to know where to go to school, contact myself or contact Hensley Williams. The email will be in the closing of the actual show, or the email is actually, I'm going to blot you out of existence here. Hold on a minute. I'm going to take you down so everybody can show it. Right there, Hensley B. Williams, email, hreal22@skyhawksutm.edu. Leave it there and I'll count to five. Okay, we're done. So, send an email, get some information if you're interested in the sociological side of it. Now that we've kind of hit the sadism, the arousal, the perception of what is real, what is not, and we're kind of, hitting main topics here out of curiosity from, society. But keep in mind, this is your topic. You did it. Cruelty to animals, the bullying, the fantasy. Now, I can see cruelty to human beings. Little Stevie bullied somebody and little Stevie got what was coming. Why why animals? I mean, come on. Nobody picks on Bambi. Who wants to cut up Bambi? Who wants to kill Bambi other than me in deer season? But why? Why the fascination with sadism, defenseless animals? Why?
It has to do because smaller animals are easy prey, especially like house pets, like cats and dogs. They're just at the moment the closest thing they can do to act on torture. So that's usually why cruelty to animals is so prominent in antisocial behavior and psychopathy and sexual sadism. It's because they are easy prey. And that also plays in part their fantasies as well. Individuals who fantasize about hurting or wanting to cause immense pain to someone can use smaller animals, and replace that person.
So that's a graduation step, kind of like a gateway. Animals to human beings. Gratification, self-love, lust, And ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about, the, in climactic time of sexual intercourse. We're talking about mens rea, psychological, the self, the gratification of why, the gratification of the exigent circumstance. Studying sadism, inflicting pain, inflicting harm for self-gratitude, self-love. I'm the alpha, the sigma. You can't do anything to prevent me from hurting you. Why is it so critical to understand sadism and the different traits, the different building blocks of sadism in sociological work? Now, everybody hears sociological, and everybody thinks social worker, elderly, kids, social work for, penology for people with mental illness. Why is it so critical? And my opinion, this is just me, from a CJ factor, from a psychological factor, especially, pushed into the CJ world, criminal investigation. That's not really big on society's Richter scale of importance to understand and keep track with, or even self-educate. I mean, it's kind of like the episode I did the other night. Every school, every university, every corporation, every business, active shooter training, keep it safe, push the trauma. It's not if, it's when, train. Well, okay, do you have to have an active shooter? Can you have an active serial killer in your corporation? I mean, think about that. I mean, everybody's fearful of that one incident, but nobody's fearful of the trait development triggers. So why is it not really paid attention to in society? Why we're not talking about just serial killers. Why is the fall of a single person not really paid attention to? Because, it develops into something bigger. Help us out. Why does society not care?
I think it has to do because abuse, bullying, and just violent, dysfunctional families are just so normalized into society that society doesn't realize that these traits can be potentially very dangerous. So they end up neglecting it, not really thinking much about it, because a lot of people go through that until that individual meets their breaking point and snap.
Okay, then that convinces me. J.J. Miller, no Grand Theft Auto for you anymore. Back to research. Yeah, something that would be perceived as simply okay in society. I mean, everybody else is doing it. Peer pressure. It's okay. Everybody else is watching violence. Everybody's got a little gunner in them. Everybody's got a little killer. Let's go play some PlayStation. There's no respawn. All right, we're going to shift down to this segment. All right, we've kind of looked at the, psychopathy, the sadism, and we talked about it, a lot of it in the past show. So let's kind of bring them together in a little bit as we kind of, wind down into this thing a little bit deeper. Psychopathy and sadism, obviously they overlap. All right. And now we're into, a different segment, a different subside of the psychopathy and sadism. Focus on offenders. All right. How do offenders show both psychopathic traits and sadist or sadomasochist or sadistic behavior? What are we looking for in the world of normal society, criminal justice, the police, mental health, victimology, corrections, penology? How do we bring the both together? What should we be looking for that obviously presents that the person is both suffering from a psychopathic developmental trait that's affecting them now in the moment, or has affected. That's why they're in front of us. Sadistic behaviors. What should we be looking for besides the society's chaotic anger? What should we be looking for besides what society would just assume? Deeper, what should we be looking for at a deeper level?
I have this in my notes, but when psychopathy and sadism co-occur, the results can be especially dangerous combination. Psychopathy contributes emotional detachment, lack of empathy, and absence of remorse, while sadism adds active enjoyment of another person's pain, fear, and humiliation. This overlap matters because it moves beyond simply committing violence for a purpose into violence that is both intentional and rewarding to the offender. To look into these acts, it really just has to do their childhood behavior. Are they getting along with other individuals? How are they getting along with individuals? Do they get along with smaller animals? Like, what are their behaviors? You really need to look into their childhood behaviors and see if these can manifest into something more dangerous.
Does that, as an adult, young teen, older teen, because there is obviously a difference between, younger teen, early developed teen, experienced teen, we'll just say it, layman term. I'm 17, I can be out on my own. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'm my own man, I'm my own woman, whatever. We've all got that. There are those triggers or trait development, times or periods in life, teenage, young adult. Is it, one's not going to go out and hunt down a cat or a mouse and try to, cut it open or barbecue it and fillet it and pull a Jeffrey Dahmer out of it. But what should we be looking for what one would say, developing adults or adults, the trauma? What creates the lack of emotion, the lack of empathy? Give us some examples of, it's CJTV, right? It's all academic, so we're not all political. So we say things here like, carnal knowledge, sexual intercourse, penis, vagina, rape, legislative law, defining sexual battery. So what is a trait development trigger for a teenager, regardless of the time, or an adult? What does society miss?
I think it has to do with aggressive sexual behavior. Wanting to interact with, like in a male's case of a serial killer, during their teenagers, they want to interact with women or have relationships, and they're either pushed off to the side, and that manifests their anger and aggression towards their sexuality and committing sexual violent behavior.
So that machoism effect, I hate that word. I always have trouble saying that word. I can't stand that word. I'm talking about machoism, that macho. I hate that word. I hate that word. It's been like the whole CJ career. Like, I can't even say that freaking word. But the male esteem, thine is more important than the other, and you have rejected me. Kind of like the, I don't know, the gentleman. I'm apologizing, but yet you still defer me away. The fourth level of rapist. So it's not really, childhood has a factor, but it can still happen to young teens. Is that what you're saying? But it has to be a little bit more. Does it have to be as intense for a teenager, or is it more intense for a child sociologically because the child really doesn't comprehend what the heck is happening?
I think the act of rejection is more intense for a teenager because they're more aware of what that rejection is and why they were rejected, rather than a child who may understand that they're being rejected, no matter what it is, like whether it's parental supervision or friendships or anything like that. They may be hurt that they're rejected, but they don't know the gravity of that rejection, whether than teenagers, they do understand the gravity of rejection.
Okay, so that strong risk pattern of, you've turned me down, I'm a kamikaze crashing at the attempt, but I was sexually assaulted by my uncle. I was sexually assaulted by my mother or my grandmother, my aunt. It was acceptable to them, but someone in normal society has shut the door on it, and now they're trying to figure out, why am I being rejected when those that were supposed to be closest to me treated me like I was, the best? Now I'm not. Now, that kind of ties in, the victimology. One suffers from the actual trait development or the triad, so to say, the dark triad of trauma that happens, and now they're a victim. Now it's the penology kind of deal. So even within the serial killer, there's still a victimology aspect. How were they victimized in the past? Research. It's let's move on to a little bit of research. We're not going to cover any case studies because, man, we could go into all kind of case studies forever, probably. But that would be a whole new research and a whole new show that would probably take all day. So let's skip the case study thing for the research study. All right, the helping professionals, understanding. All right, all of this overlaps. Every bit is it, all of it. It's sociological, psychological, CJ. Criminal justice staff, thing that, myself, unless you're tuned in to a special division in a department, and we'll use BAU, like FBI, behavioral analysis. When I was in CID and I was working task force, we always did the exigent reason, the mens rea, the threat assessment, even the individual threat assessment, mental health, exigent circumstance from past trauma that would enable or trigger more trauma during the case, to be exhibited toward the victim or us, if we show up on scene. But that really is not supervisory in the world of sociology, nor is it psychology, because everybody thinks, well, psychology, you're out there running the streets and you're being Dr. Save the World and identifying and assessing. No, you're not. Social people in the world of sociology are more so out there in the environment, embedded in the communities, than psychology people. Let's just be real about this. You're not going to go see anybody that's got a psychology background unless you do it willfully. You were inserted to it or forced into it, court order, or it's an intervention, or something along those lines. So, supervision, challenges. What are some, from, your research, what you've seen, developing as a scholar and recognized, what are the treatment challenges in society for people that everything that we've just talked about here on the show so far are suffering from? What are the treatment challenges? Is it just a lack of genuine education, or just a simple lack of caring?
So with adults with psychopathy, sexual sadism, or antisocial personality disorder, like I said in a previous episode, there is no cure for it. It really just, it does lessen as an individual grows older and older, but there is no actual cure for those disorders. However, interventions in early childhood and even interventions in teenage years are helpful to cut that psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder from manifesting into violent behaviors or violent acts on other individuals. So you really need to pay attention to a child's behavior as they're growing, and understand if it is potentially dangerous or if it is just normal childhood.
And that kind of capitalizes on what I said, not necessarily so to say it's, peer review proof, but on the psychological side of it, unless you've been, writ ordered to go, or it's a, self-admittance or some type of intervention, or, something that it was a causation or a reason for someone to seek treatment, get an assessment, and get on the treatment program, either psychiatry or, whatever it would be. It's psychologists, psychiatrists. People don't understand the difference in that. One can prescribe, one cannot. So psychopathy, there is no cure, but there is medication for psychopathy development. There is the medication there, which would be the psychiatrist, not the sociologist or something. So, yeah. But, it's, in my experience, there's more trigger of social side in it through state, through CJ, through just communal, than there ever was, psych, so to say, even within the identity of the, psychopathy development, because it had to be identified first. And typically, and everybody knows, it's always going to begin with a complaint or a 911 call, or something's going to happen that's going to involve CJ. And then you have Cletus, Bob, little Steve, and Bubba showing up who have no idea what they're looking at. That's just the truth. Cheeseburger mustard stain on their tie, car all dirty. Everybody saw the Fat Cop, Fit Cop episode. Yep. That applies to the cognitive ability too. So let's move on to another segment 4 here. The combination of the mind. Okay, we can move from personality traits to crime scene and behavior, obviously, look at the patterns of sexual assault, what type it was, typical psychopath, serial killer, what everybody would, consider to be the standard homicide case for a serial killer. But there's a problem here. The motivation, the sexual behavior. You've explained the sexual behavior is not really about sexual arousal. It's dominance, it's power, it's control, it's sadism, force. It's I'm the one in control and I'm the one that has power over pain and pleasure, even your life. What's the dadgum motivation, man? I mean, obviously it's not like, ooh, he's hot. Ooh, she's hot or sexy. There's something happening here that people miss. There's something happening here that law enforcement misses. And for all you law enforcement guys and girls out there, ladies and gents, in the Leo world with the shiny badges, it's not an insult. You just don't know. Okay? Hollywood doesn't know. Stop watching. It falls more into the sociological side of it because the psychiatrists, the assessments, they're never going to happen until law enforcement gets their fingers into it first. But if society misses it, sociologically, social workers miss it, social practitioners miss it. If they're missing it, how are we as CJ or how society is supposed to pick up on it? So why the motivation? What is the motivation? What causes the motivation? The pattern? I mean, what? Your opinion? There's got to be something else besides I want to cut up animals and power and now I'm graduating. There's got to be something else besides porn or the boy like girl, girl like boy, boy like boy, LGBTQ. There's got to be something else that's a motivational push. What would that be in your opinion?
I have this in my notes that I think answers that question
Okay.
well. Serial killers, according to motivation, include visionary, mission-oriented, power control, thrill-seeking, and financial motivated. Childhood abuse has strongly associated with sexually motivated serial killers, with research showing significant higher rates of abuse among less oriented offenders compared to non-serial offender populations. Physical abuse was strongly associated with rape lust and anger-based typologies. Offenders who experienced physical abuse were more likely to commit rapid murders, find victims, and display signs of overkill. Psychological abuse was also linked to rape lust motivations as well as financially motivated killing. In these cases, offenders frequently demonstrated torture, mutilation, and excessive violence toward victims. Sexual abuse showed the broadest influence connecting to all four major typologies: lust, anger, power, and financial gain. Sexual abuse was particularly associated with torture, victim restraint, and mutilation. Furthermore, offenders who experienced multiple forms of abuse simultaneously were most likely to develop rape lust motivations and engage in high violent crime scene behaviors, including finding victims and excessive aggravation. To answer your question, I think childhood behavior, not childhood behavior, but child adverse experiences are the most significantly linked to serial killers' behaviors, and those different typologies of childhood abuse, like physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect or sexual abuse, all contribute to their crime scene patterns and criminal behaviors and signatures. It all goes back to their childhood.
So being a child, it's kind of like law enforcement, sociology. The example I used last time, social services, social works, goes to a house, welfare check. We're not letting you in. Well, they're going to get in the house because they're going to call us and we're going to show up. They're going to show us the paperwork with the state ID, the case. We're getting in the house. Sucks to be you saying no because you're going to wind up being face down or out of the house, because they're for the children, not the adult. Now, that being said, the reason law enforcement has that power and the reason social services are those within the sociology side of, the 3-tier symbiotic Hakuna Matata circle, psychology, C-Day sociology, the child is protected by the word of law too, just as an adult, but the child doesn't understand. So the things you just said, everything, the child is still a victim, developmental trait, non-comprehension, and growing up with the trauma, it is still interpretive to someone whose cognitive ability to assess is already distorted. Would that be fair? And I'm, approaching this from a CJ level. It's already been distorted. And unless somebody undistorts it, puts the puzzle together correctly, they're growing up with puzzle pieces in the wrong place and it's distorted. Does that make sense from a CJ kind of guy?
I agree. I agree with you. This is also why early intervention in childhood who are experiencing those like psychopathy traits and just aggressive behaviors, it's so important to get to it early so it doesn't manifest into something more. But I agree with you.
And that could actually develop into ritualistic behavior too, if they haven't overcome the distortion, overcome the ill interpretation, ritual crimes. A lot of people would, like to compare that, ritual cult crimes, ritual practices. No, ritualistic for me, CJ, there's an intent, there's a means. An example would be religion, performing a specific act against somebody that would be, number one, power, control, painful, but yet inserting something that is ritualistic to get one's point across of my religion is better than yours. Kind of the sadist, kind of the power, the control. So I kind of get that, yeah. But I think I'm going to stick with the puzzle pieces are in the wrong place until somebody catches it. Yeah, that's kind of, I kind of figured that out a long time ago. I was working Safe Streets a long time ago. It was U.S. Marshals Task Force when they first came out. And we were down in Tupelo, Mississippi on Green Street. It was like a really violent area. I wouldn't say violent. Every city's got what their area they call violent, but it's one of their bad areas. And sometimes in society, just that connection with people that you talk to, and not everybody in every part of the area, everybody would say, it's the slums, it's the hood, it's the ghetto. Well, not everybody there is bad. It's just economic. And you would have conversations with those people that would be more than happy to talk to you and help you and tell you where the bad people were at and hanging out. But comprehension, man, just something as simple for me, the law, how they're protected, how we can help them protect them, just oblivious. Their interpretation was night and day as compared to ours, what we were taught, university, academy, training, experience. So that ritualistic patternization or trait development in a serial killer. Look at that, society. We're all getting, as Homer Simpson would say, learned by Hensley Williams. Sociological side. Let's move on to our last segment. This is probably my favorite one. Okay. Looking at crime itself, just criminal, the crime, okay? Murder, serial killer. Whatever it would be, Michael Myers version, chainsaw, Leatherface, whatever, knife, or real world, plotted out, methodical, planned, not just a wham bam crime of opportunity. I kind of look at it as you need to step back and look at the bigger picture. Think stalker, all right? Someone that does something at, a crime of opportunity. A guy's in a bar. He sees an attractive female. She, as you said, turns him down. Now he's there. That trigger, that moment, that hippocampus is open, that drawer, everybody else loved me and my family. I was, sexually abused. My aunt said, my school teacher, female, told me I was great, all this. And now suddenly I'm a grown adult man and I'm in society and I'm being turned down. Now, the bigger question, that's not a developmental stalker when he's following her home to commit a crime, rape, assault, murder. That's not a serial murder. That's not even really a crime of opportunity. So we're talking about developmental pathways of a serial killer. The life, the sequence, the experiences that, as you kind of argued down, shape who we are, how we perceive, the breaks that we take, as you said, Law enforcement's not looking for me. So now it's my time. Law enforcement's looking for me. Time to slow down. Time to go under the radar. Trauma. The family, you touch that. Things that contribute to it, violence. What else applies toward recognition for prevention and early intervention? If you were this is why I brought up the Safe Streets Task Force. It was the first time I was assigned to a federal task force, and this was years ago, man. But nobody in that neighborhood really understood the word of law as we spoke it to them. What their rights were, what we could do without a warrant, what they had the, right. They had no clue. It's like they didn't go to school. They just weren't taught. Mm-hmm. Prevention, early intervention. Not just punishment in society, but what are we going to look for in effort to solve the problems? Your opinion. I don't want to say put it on a scale 1 to 10, but what are the ones we should really be looking for in today's society? Obviously, it's 2026. It's not, 1990s.
I think what we should be looking for most to activate interventions or kind of look at their behaviors is children's behavior in, like, I don't really want to say romantic ways, but children can have crushes and they can want like a girl or like a boy, and if they get rejected, you see how they are reacting to it. They become very aggressive or kind of can't regulate their emotions. That may be a sign to look into, because once they become teenagers and dating and romantic relationships are more serious, those traits that weren't corrected can manifest into something worse. And then that can also manifest into their adult lives where they become sexual sadist.
Yeah, but that kind of jumps back to the nature, raised by wolves, mm-hmm. raised by the village, so to say. So, it just mom and dad, the community, the school teachers, that's probably like one of the greatest trends in the history of education in the United States, or possibly the planet. Educators not knowing what to look for, not knowing what to watch for. Good points. So a lot of it is really early developmental. One would have to say, and just from talking to you tonight, everybody likes to watch a TV show, okay? Bob lost his wife and lost his kids in a car accident, and he's triggered by somebody on a road rage incident, and now he's turned into the serial killer of the city. Well, Bob has coping skills. They may not be 100% on point. They may be a little bit diminished due to the episodic memory recall of losing family during the road rage incident because he lost his family in a car wreck. But yet, Bob, as a grown individual, would have some form of coping skills. Then it would just turn into anger. It wouldn't be a psychopathy lack of emotion, no remorse, no empathy in the moment. It would be a choice. Am I going down the right pattern here? Am I going down the right avenue here? So
yes, you are.
So it would be a choice. So that's that developmental pathway means. It's kind of like the sum. I hated statistics and sums. God, I hate it. Can't stand it. For all of you people in universities or academia, this guy, I hated those two classes. I hated SV1 and SV2. Couldn't stand it. All right. A few more things we're going to let you close the hammer on, okay? And I'm sitting here looking at it, and there was a lot of research between the stuff that you did, and a lot of it, and a lot of it that I found. Juvenile justice is not my area of expertise. I've never liked that area. Let me repeat that. I've never liked that area. It's not because it's not part of CJ. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I spent more time toward criminal investigations, violent crime, high risk, yada, yada, yada. But developmentally, the pathway, the means, a lot of it starts at the juvenile side. A lot of it starts at lack of cognition, lack of understanding. And if it's not developed correctly, the neglect, the abuse, the trauma, and the exposure, that's the way to go. That's the way they're going to develop. So, for the show here with us, developmental means and pathways, we're going to cover a few things. What is routine and what is not routine? Now, when I ask what is routine, normal person perception of this is normal trauma versus this is normal trauma, but this is what was not done correctly to help a child suffering normal trauma. Does that make sense to you? So let's start with that. Early years, teen years, normal trauma. How do people assess that's normal treatment, or that's normal trauma, but nobody did anything. Now it's just going to get worse?
No, I don't know if there's something called normal trauma.
I just made that up.
Like when I think of abuse, I think of like neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
All of it can be so different to the individual and how they process it. So some individuals may feel like that happened to me, and I've got to move on with my life, and they try their best to not make it interfere with their day-to-day living. On the other hand, some people are severely traumatized by it, and that is what you see when people have psychopathy disorder or sadism. They want to take back that control, and especially in like sexual abuse, they want to take back that control that was done to them, and they want to put it on someone else.
That's kind of deep right there. Yeah, the violence, something that was stolen, taken away, and not necessarily that they want to go out and steal and take away from somebody else, but they want to take the harm, the trauma, and in layman terms, just get it off of their own back, get rid of the monkey on the back, so to say, give it to somebody else. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out that way. Interesting perception. I never looked at it that way. Here's my trauma in your gift bag just for you, even though it's not going to work. That's a different look at it. I guarantee you nobody watching this show ever looked at it that way. If you have, put it in a comment and prove it. I want to see you prove it. All right. Childhood trauma, neglect, abuse, exposure. Kind of covered that. The responsibility. Now, here's when we get into the practitioner side. All right. Sociology, psychology, CJ. The respond conflict. You said it yourself. Don't know if there's any normal trauma. Well, normal trauma. Okay. I stabbed myself with a pen, whatever. Normal stuff. Not every form of neglect of a child or a young teen or an older teen is normal that everybody would go through. I agree with you there, or the abuse or the exposure to it. But there's that lack of response. So there's the respond conflict of society that aids in the respond conflict of the victim who is developing a psychopathy, who then later in life turns into a serial killer. So why is society lacking in that, respond error, that response side? There's a big conflict in society. Is it just a lack of education, or a lack of people like yourself that are developing scholars in the world of sociology? Or, what is it?
It's the lack of education. Not everyone knows to look for these signs. Usually when people do see these signs, they blame the parents, and then they try to get interventions on parents, but they don't seek out any other ways to help the child, or they just blame the child on their actions themselves. Like, they're just a bad kid, there's no helping them, and it's just the labeling. I think it has to just do with education, lack of education. Not everyone knows to look for these signs or know the extent of these signs.
So the extent of it is there. Never looked at it that way. But, you know, that's the juvenile side to it. That's the juvenile. All right, I'm looking. We're going to cover one more. I just looked and that echo button was on, so this thing may have some echoes in it. If it does, it's cool. It's one of those YouTube things. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That light just flicked on. I like hit it and turned it off. All right, let's cover one thing before we close this thing out. Understanding developmental, schools, families, justice systems. How does all of this wind together to prevent violent behavior, violent fantasies from enveloping into real hands-on, you know, psychopathy for serial killers? How do families, schools, the justice system, if you were to make a superstar policy or, you know, target something, where would you start in society to prevent juvenile, early teen, later teen, young adult, whatever it would be? Not necessarily prevent, but maybe target, maybe identify, maybe a platform for education for society. Where would you, if you were the head number one person in charge of America to do this, where would you put all of your attention first?
I would put my attention towards childhood abuse, specifically sexual abuse. Research has shown that sexual abuse is very common with serial killers and sexual sadism. Those manifesting fantasies that they have all contribute to their sexual abuse that happened to them as a child. So I would definitely target their abuse that they suffered, and specifically their sexual abuse.
Okay. Sex crimes. Number one, sex crimes. You know, I've heard that before from multiple investigators that argue the same thing, especially when they go through the child forensic interviews. You know, the one shot, one time to prevent the trauma. You know, they're only allowed to do it one time. I've heard that a lot from them. I did that, you know, some cases with that. I never really liked it. It wasn't my cup of tea. I did more assist, and when I made lieutenant commander, then I was going through those cases. Learned a lot more reviewing those cases versus some of the, you know, violent crime cases I did. All right, here we go. I'm going to share this. For those of you watching this superstar episode, if you heard the echo, it's because the inner switch in YouTube turned it back on. Just watch it again. That's all I got to say. I'm going to open something up. The publication with Hensley B. Williams is out in myself. Go download it, and it is right. Let me move us out of the way here. It is right there. It is downloadable from Facebook, the CJTV side of Facebook, Dr. Mike Gurley, CJTV, and LinkedIn, Michael Gurley, PhD. Go get it, download it, use it for your educational purposes. And yes, it is syndicated and published, and it is syndicated and published and copyrighted under this show. Yes, this episode. So please feel free, cite it. Use the resources, guys. But if you cite any of, you know, the authors and, you know, co-distributors, which would be myself and the Honorable Hensley, cite it correctly. That's all I got to say. Make sure you cite it correctly, but people feel free, download it, read it. It's a lot of good information, a lot of good resource. It was something. How long did it take? What was this, like a 2.5 week, 3 week endeavor for research?
Yeah.
Yeah.
About
like
3 weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't something quick, guys, because you know how it is. CJ people saying, hey, go read this. Sociology people always like tear you to pieces. Like vultures. Yep. You're thinking cop, man. You're thinking cop. Get off the cop thing. So it's all good. Close us out with serial killers. If, you know, tonight's live stream, you know, we explored emotionless behavior, violence, sexual cruelty, life experience, you know, it's sadomasochist behavior, pain, power, pleasure. But we covered it all at psychopathy level, because that's where it is. What one sees as all these things that I just said, really, it's not the true sociological definition of what one would think it would be. It's completely different. So take us out. close this show for us. Give us, in society, the number one factor, the number one, in your opinion, reason adults choose, knowing right from wrong, knowing I lived through trauma, wasn't exactly great. Give us the reason adults choose psychopathia to become serial killers. I mean, it's a given choice. It may be a mental illness or psychopathy, but why do adults choose to be serial killers? Male and female, okay? Different MOs, different practitioner skills, but why did Gina decide to be a serial killer?
It has to do with the lack of empathy or remorse. Guilt, empathy, remorse, they tie you to do good versus bad. You want to do good because you don't want to feel the guilt, or you want to have the empathy to do good. These ties can be challenges for individuals with antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. They don't want those ties because they're all about the gain for themselves. So those traits that normal individuals have, they steer you to do more good than bad. And without remorse or guilt, individuals who with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, there is no gain with those traits. They're all about the gain for themselves.
Sounds like a bad boss. Oh my God. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Closing it out. Remember, lack of empathy, lack of remorse, the self-gain. Not just, so to say, it's the narcissist in your life, because everybody may have a narcissist in their life, but they still have empathy. They still have remorse for specific chosen factors, chosen traits, chosen experiences. But remember, a serial killer, per Hensley Williams, remorse, empathy, it's about them. It's not you. There's only one thing about you. You're going to die. It's a serial killer. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for being a co-host. Shoot her an email. Good times. We got other ones coming up in the future, ladies and gentlemen. So, remember, do not be a victim.